Hi, welcome everybody from Café Weltschmerz in The Hague. Café Weltschmerz is an independent TV channel. This press conference is organized by Bonanza Media and Global Rights for Peaceful People. We'll be discussing several subjects regarding MH17. My name is Erik van der Beek. I'm an independent journalist. Next to me sitting is Professor Kees van der Pijl. He has written a book about MH17. Next to him, our German guest, Billy Six. He did his own research in eastern Ukraine. Later on we will have a Skype connection with Professor Kees van der Professor Cees Hameling, sorry, and with Jana Jerlasova. I've been asked to say a few words to introduce this meeting, and I will say, tell you my thoughts about how the media reported about MH17. The presumption of innocence is an essential principle in our legal system. One is considered innocent until proven guilty. What we have seen in the MH17 case the past 6 years is what I would describe as a trial by media. Almost from day one, the Western media have been pointing fingers at the rebels in Donbass and at Russia. It has never stopped, and it's still going on. First, on a personal note, when I heard the news about the crash, it came as a shock. What happened on that fatal day is beyond comprehension. It's pure horror, not only to those who happen to be in the plane, but also to the next of kin. I strongly feel for these people. In fact, I met two of them. I expressed my sympathy, and there are simply no words to describe the magnitude of the whole event. Who is to blame for the MH17 disaster? At least two parties are to blame. First, those in Ukraine who kept the airspace open in Donbass, where a war was going on land as well as in the air. Several military aircraft had already been shot from the sky, at least 16. Had Ukraine fully closed its airspace above the eastern part of the country, it would have been impossible to take down a passenger plane in the first place. The second party guilty of this drama are those who pulled the trigger. And so now, who were those who pulled the trigger? It's still unclear, not only to me, but also to the joint investigation team that's leading the criminal investigation. The only thing they think they are sure of is that MH17 was brought down by a book installation from Russia. That's why the Dutch government and the Australian government have officially declared they're holding Russia responsible for the deployment of the book installation they think was used to down MH17. And it's also because of these findings of the GIT that the Dutch public prosecutor has started a trial in the Netherlands against 4 military leaders of the Donetsk People's Republic. The public prosecutor views these men as, quote, leading players who took delivery of a book tailor from the Russian Federation and deployed it as part of their own military operation with the aim of shooting down an aircraft, unquote. Now, something is clearly missing here: the responsibility of Ukraine. Why doesn't the Dutch government hold Ukraine responsible for not having fully closed its airspace above a war zone? And why don't we have a trial now in the Netherlands against individuals who were at that time responsible for the Ukrainian airspace? These questions have been raised in the Dutch parliament on several occasions. But here we are after 6 years. The Russian state held liable by the Dutch and Australian government, military commanders of the Donetsk People's Republic being put on trial by the Dutch public prosecutor, no one from Ukraine criminally prosecuted, and no accusations from the Dutch government brought against Kiev. Are there political games at play here? I will not go into that question today. Instead, I will say a few words now about the role of the media in the MH17 case. In my early 20s, when I learned to become a journalist, I worked at this local newspaper. And I remember this phone conversation with a police officer. He asked for my help in finding a suspect of a robbery. I was very much willing to help him, but then the chief editor intervened. He said, "Eric, we are newspaper men. It's not our job to help the police. We're here to watchdog the police, to critically question them, and to hold them accountable for their actions." This is what I learned. It's basic in journalism, to challenge the authorities and not to become their instrument. Every journalist should act like this anywhere in the world, anytime. I mentioned the Joint Investigation Team, JIT. They're leading the criminal investigation into the MH17 case. And so it should be JIT that the Dutch press should watchdog, and not the ones that are being accused by JIT for having downed MH17. But quite the opposite I've seen happening. Dutch journalists have behaved like mouthpieces of JIT. Instead of doing their own research and confront JIT with uncomfortable questions and trying to shoot holes into the JIT narrative, they have turned themselves into instruments of JIT. By on the one hand just reporting about the findings of JIT, the press conferences, no fact-checking at all, and on the other hand, in some cases, even helping JIT to substantiate their accusations against the rebels in Russia. Mm. The same, not only has the Dutch press uncritically reported about the findings of, JIT, the same goes for the findings of Bellingcat and SBU, the Ukrainian Secret Service. They've been main suppliers of news about MH17. The Dutch media have done nothing but reporting what these two sources had to say. Again, no fact-checking at all. From day one, it's been hammered into the heads of the people the rebels were guilty, and probably Russia too. The blame game started immediately after the crash. Only 6 hours after the downing of MH17, the Ukrainian Secret Service, SBU, put a video on YouTube with tapped, intercepted conversations from rebels in Ukraine, indicating that they had brought down MH17. This video was immediately picked up by the media the same day, among which the Dutch evening news program Nieuwsuur on July 17th, 2014. One person incriminated in the SBU video was Igor Besler, at that time a sub-commander of the Donetsk People's Republic. He is heard on the phone intercept saying, "We have just shot down a plane." In another phone intercept published by SBU, someone informs Besler that a birdie is flying towards him, meaning a plane. Besler then instructs him to report this message upwards to the higher echelons of the Ukrainian military, the Donbass military command. According to Bellingcat, the interaction between these two men had probably, highly likely, as they say, facilitated the spotting of MH17 as an enemy aircraft. However, Besler is not standing trial in the Netherlands. In his opening statement, in the MH17 court case, the public prosecutor said that the investigation was unable to establish that the birdie conversation, the conversation about a birdie coming, had contributed to the downing of flight MH17. Quote, The investigation revealed that the time between this conversation and the launch of the missile was too short that it was questionable whether the conversation could have contributed to the downing of the aircraft, unquote. Also, and this was something not mentioned by the public prosecutor, Besseler's phone call about the downing of a plane was not about MH17. It was about the rebels having hit a Ukrainian military aircraft the day before, on July the 16th. The SBU had antedated the audio segment to make it look as if it was about MH17. This is only one example. Many individuals have been incriminated by the SBU and Bellingcat. And the media keep on copy-pasting everything they come up with, without fact-checking anything. There's only one Dutch professional journalist who did some good reporting on MH17. His name is Jeroen Akkermans of RTL, who went to the crash site several times and did his own research. Another professional journalist from the Netherlands, Joost Niemuller, managed to bring out a book about MH17 even before the official Dutch investigation at the crash site had started. But the best journalists I have seen in the past 6 years on the MH17 case are in fact citizen journalists. In the Netherlands, most notably Max van der Werf, Hector Reban and Stefan Beck. They spent thousands of hours investigating, both at the crash site and online. I know them personally. They know what they are talking about, and they are persons of high integrity. And of course, I should add our German guest today, Billy Six, who did his own research. If they were sure Russia or the rebels were involved in the downing of MH17, no one in the world could stop these men from sharing this with the public. They are not propagating Kremlin narratives. In fact, they even distance themselves from these narratives. They are simply saying, we don't know who downed MH17. Until now, we have seen no compelling evidence MH17 was brought down by a book tailor from Russia. Dutch journalists from the mass media could have consulted these men or have provided them with a stage. But nothing of the sort happened. The Dutch media decided to give them the silent treatment. This worked out pretty well with Hector Reban and Stefan Beck. But when it became impossible for the media to ignore Max van der Werf, because he had become a celebrity on social media and on the alternative media, and I should add Billy Six to that, and the BBC had started mentioning his name, they started attacking Max. Just read what the daily papers, NRC and the Volkskrant wrote about him. Of all things, they accuse him of disturbing the MH17 investigation and the MH17 trial. And so, there you have it. On the one hand, citizen journalists acting like true journalists by challenging the authorities. And then, on the other hand, professional journalists from the big media trying to protect the authorities against these citizen journalists. These professional journalists see themselves as watchdogs. And they are, but in an ironical way. They are watchdogs barking up the wrong tree. Instead of challenging the authorities, they are criticizing the citizen journalists who act like true journalists. As I started off my introduction, the presumption of innocence is an essential principle in our legal system. One is considered innocent until proven guilty. However, what we have seen in the MH17 case in the past 6 years is a trial by media. I think it's time to turn the tables. In this specific case, it should be the media that are on trial. Thank you. Then I now would like to give Professor Kees van der Pijl the opportunity to say a few words.
Yeah, well, thank you, Eric. I'm happy with the title, Trial by Media, for the reasons that Eric has already explained, and I'm very glad to be here. I've always felt that the organization of People for Peace, I abbreviate the title a little bit, they represent one of the great dramas of the Ukrainian civil war and the massacre in Odessa, and it's an honor to be part of anything that they organize, and this is not the first time. We are looking at the trial now in a completely new form of justice. Many people forget that the form of justice that we're dealing with here is a new form. It's international criminal justice, and it didn't really exist before the collapse of the Soviet Union, because only when that happened, the United States and the West at large became the judges of everything that happened in the world and the effective prosecutors of everything that happened in the world. And that is how we have come to see the Yugoslavia Tribunal, the Rwanda Tribunal, the Lockerbie Trial, although that was something that happened before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the trial only came later. And of course we have seen the establishment of the International Criminal Court. Eric indicated that journalists have not done their work properly, but I would go much further. They actually have perverted justice to a considerable extent. Also, the juridical process itself. In the Netherlands, I'll come to the role of the Netherlands later because that was not always a very positive role. In the Netherlands, there's a research project led by a Utrecht professor, Beatrice de Graaf, which is called Terrorists on Trial. And this research project has brought together people who studying the possibilities of a trial, not just to arrive at legally sound and just conclusions, but also to turn it into a form of theater. And that is not my interpretation, that's the title that they officially use for their activities. Terrorists on Trial participants are trying to introduce, and I quote, notions of social drama and communication science into the courtroom. So that it's not just about dry articles and this and that, but a trial is a means to get a visible and theatrical effect that will convince mass audiences, and it will play with and bend in a certain direction certain concepts and narratives of justice. So people will be treated to something that is not really a trial in the sense that there's a law and the letter of the law says this and then it has to be interpreted, etc. No, we are treated to a piece of theater, and this theater is meant to turn certain narratives into the established story of an event. The legal details of these international criminal trials have proven very difficult to pursue. So, for instance, the Yugoslavia and the Rwanda Tribunal were established by the Security Council of the United Nations. The Lockerbie Trial, on the other hand, was a trial under Scottish law, but held on Dutch soil, because at the time, for reasons that I've never understood, the Netherlands was considered a neutral country, and it was made acceptable to Libya to hold it here. The ICC, of course, has its head office here in The Hague, and maybe in an act of utmost theater, there is a Hague Invasion Act which allows the United States to intervene and actually land troops in the Netherlands to liberate those suspects that are either US or US allies, in particular Israel, who might be brought before the International Criminal Tribunal, International Criminal Court. The result of that has been that the only people who have been prosecuted and condemned by the International Criminal Court were Africans. Now, everyone who has followed world history will know that that the crimes that have been committed since the founding of the ICC in 2002 were not just those committed by Africans, but there were many more committed, if you just think of the invasion of Iraq in 2003, against every attempt that had been made to prevent it. Now, one of the elements of theater that is involved in the MH17 trial, which started in last March and will be resumed in a few days, I think tomorrow or Monday, coming Monday, 8th of June, is the role that has been accorded to family members. And these family members, and Eric already indicated what a tragedy these people have to live with. You know, you don't have to be a genius to understand what goes through people's minds when they think of how their loved ones lost their lives at a height of 10 kilometers over eastern Ukraine. And yet, the way the Dutch government and the prosecution have made use of these people through particular selected representatives of the family members, in my view, has shown a large degree of cynicism and doesn't at all reflect the compassion that we should feel when we deal with these people. The representatives of the family members have been shown on television programs, they have been in talk shows, they have been used as diplomatic players, sending letters, for instance, to the then Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir, when he refused to go along with certain steps taken by the JIT, and so on. And that's a form of theater. That means there you see how the ideas of this terrorism on trial group are being put into practice to create among a mass public, because every evening some 1-2 million people apparently are watching these talk shows. They are being treated to a talk show in which the suffering and the tragedy that people have to live with is being turned into a tool of mass manipulation. And as Eric said, whereas you would normally expect that you start from the presumption of innocence, in this case, long before anything comes before the judge, the mass public has already made its judgment on the basis of these highly emotional statements by family members. And what else could they be but highly emotional? You know, it's not just the people who are on TV, it's also in ladies' magazines, and all kind of channels are being used to reach a mass public for this theatrical element. Now, the narratives and the stories told about the different, in the different international criminal courts have always had great problems to come to an actual conviction. In the case of Yugoslavia, the story was that Milosevic, the leader of rump Yugoslavia, so basically Serbia and Montenegro, was trying to create a greater Serbia. And that was the basis of the prosecution's case. He was, for the mass public, presented as a new Hitler. And although I wouldn't ask Milosevic to take care of my savings and my mother-in-law, there's no doubt that being the new Hitler requires a little bit more than what Milosevic had to offer. In the end, and this was a scandal for Dutch justice, I would say, Milosevic died in his cell because it turned out that it was impossible to prove that he had really entertained this project of a greater Serbia. And the reason for that was simple. It never existed. And that's one of the contradictions of these trials, which will also come to play in the case of MH17, because international criminal law is based on the idea of individual responsibility. It is very difficult to make the leap from the individual whom you arrest, and in this case of MH17, the 4 people arrested really are random figures almost, to the larger project of, in this case, the Greater Serbia, or in the case of Rwanda, the planned genocide by Hutus of Tutsis, which left unprosecuted the role of Paul Kagame, who's still being celebrated the world over as a sort of liberator of Rwanda, whereas in fact he is at least as culpable as some of the Hutu masses who went on a rampage after the plane with their president on board was downed in 1994, and that set off the large carnage. In that case, too, one man, actually a Hutu leader who had flown to the United Nations to beg for intervention and prevent the bloodbath, he was arrested. He was one of the 4 Hutu leaders who was locked up, and this man, Barangagwiza, died in his cell as well. So another victory, not exactly for justice, another case of the impossibility to hold individual people responsible for large collective processes. And that's the same with MH17, because you mentioned already the closure of the Ukrainian airspace, but who was responsible for the civil war? Who was responsible for the large-scale military exercises, the role of NATO, the support that was given to the coup in February 2014, and so on and so forth? Lockerbie is a different story, but I won't hold you too long. The point is this. Again, today we are in the midst of a trial which is based on a certain narrative. And the narrative is that Russia was the aggressor in Ukraine. So it shouldn't surprise us that there are 3 Russians and 1 East Ukrainian who are in the dock. None of them actually had any command role in the firing of the buck. And one of the revelations of Bonanza Media has actually been that the Dutch military intelligence came up with established the location of all buck installations at the time of the downing of the plane, and they found that not one was within distance of being able to shoot at the plane. That's one of the, it's also many people, but that's not our topic today, many specialists from former Warsaw Pact countries who were specialists in air defense and had a lot of experience with using these anti-aircraft missiles. All of them said that what happens to a plane hit by a buck or a comparable anti-aircraft missile is not that it breaks up in parts and lands on over a wide area, but it explodes in the air. But that's a detail. Now, as I said, we have these. We have a narrative. We have elements of theater. We have an individual-based prosecution, which charges people with a responsibility for large, complex historical events, and such a trial is bound to fail. And yet, for political reasons, it has a certain function. And I always think of the one of the writers of the French May '68 movement, Guy Debord. He wrote a famous book in 1967, which was called The Society of the Spectacle, in which he says people no longer are the autonomous subjects of their actions. They basically are turned into passive spectators who are watching a permanent show of celebrities, politicians who have been turned into celebrities, sports heroes who have been turned into quasi politicians. And I would say, if you look at the talk shows these days, you see an endless recycling of the same story about any topic that you might wish to select. And you also see the same people who are being shown. You see the family members, in this case of the MH17. There they are again. There's again the same man whom I won't name here because it doesn't sound good with my Dutch accent. The point is that in this recycled news show, this recycled spectacle, there's no space for dissent. Not a single dissenting person. You mentioned Max van der Werf, Hector Reban, Stefan Beck and others. And they're also specialists on narrower topics. In Germany, of course, we have Billy Six. None of these have ever been able to explain their position in a program. On the contrary, Billy was attacked not so long ago on a different issue. You mentioned that Max van der Werf was also attacked in the Dutch newspaper. There is an effective censorship going on. In all modesty, and I'm not here for a sales pitch, but I wrote a book which has now come out in 4 languages on the wider story of the Civil War and the, well, there are 3 cameras there, so it should, yeah. It has been completely ignored in the Netherlands. That means that there's an unwillingness to consider any position that even departs in a very small way, and this doesn't depart in a small way, but there's a taboo on alternative views.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
It's not been translated in Dutch, is it?
No, but it has also never been mentioned, except in a recent piece in the NRC Handelsblad, in which I was accused of being an anti-Semite, probably in the same class as Jeremy Corbyn, I would think, if I reconstruct the situation a little bit. And there it was said that I did write a book. Of course, they didn't give the title. You shouldn't confuse people. And it was said that it was rightly ignored, etc. Now, the last time that I spoke for the group that's organizing this event was in the press conference in Nieuwsport, here also in The Hague. And on account of that, and there I mentioned that we were preparing a dossier on the topic, on the MH17 case, and I received a letter from the Dutch prosecutor's office asking me to send them that dossier when it was finished. But I replied, well, in my mind I replied, why should I send it to you? Because you've shown yourself to be completely corrupt in the case of the joint investigation team. So there's no point for me to send it to the prosecution. I should at least, or perhaps send it to the defense. So I replied, this was my silent thought, but I replied that since the dossier would be public on various websites, there was no need to send a separate copy to them. Then, when the trial was about to start, I sent a message to the defense lawyers of the one defendant, Pulatov, who had chosen to have himself represented in the case by lawyers. And after some time, I got a reply from them, basically asking for my CV, and they had also already seen that the dossier was in the public domain. Now, the question is, what can we expect from either the prosecution in this case, or the defense lawyers? Now, John Helmer, important correspondent, Western correspondent, actually the longest standing correspondent from the West in Moscow, has written about the qualifications of the defense lawyers. And he has pointed out, among many other things, that they haven't once said that Pulatov is innocent. Now, that is something that a lawyer does by almost, well, in the way that Eric indicated, you know, the presumption of innocence. So in that sense, we can't expect much of this trial. We can hope that when the judge in this trial asked for the satellite images that the United States claims to have of the firing of the missile, that he sticks to that demand. Because if he sticks to that demand, the trial will fail. Because these satellite images either would have existed and they would have been shown on TV day in, day out. And if they don't exist, of course, they can't be supplied either, and then the whole case drops. Now, if the defense is of the quality that we're seeing now so far, and that if Helmer is right in his analysis of the backgrounds of the defense lawyers, I think we can't expect anything from the defense either. Now, the last point is trial by social media. And here, the work of the Bonanza team, and also especially of Hector Reban is very important. Hector Reban, that's his pen name, says that the MH17 process, trial, is actually, or may actually be, an experiment with trying to create a situation in which all the evidence that is on which you will in the end be convicted is provided by social media sources. Now that is a novelty in justice, because normally you would have witnesses, and you know there were no witnesses at first in the MH17 case, except that now 12 anonymous witnesses have been produced. Now these anonymous witnesses can of course say anything because nobody knows who they are, what their background is. But in this case, this evidence of witnesses and other forensic evidence will not be the primary cause. The primary basis for convictions might be, and that would be an absolute novelty, social media sources. And in his contribution to our joint dossier, and I should say that he did, Hector Reban really did the hard work for that, the work on the analyzing the details of where the bug was supposed to be and so on, you know. It's 250 pages of work that he put into that. There he also analyzes the role of Bellingcat, and Bellingcat is a subset, or not really a subsidiary, but it's associated with the Integrity Initiative, which is an anti-Russian propaganda unit that was set up by British military intelligence. And Bellingcat, of course, made a name for itself under a different name. He was Higgins, the man behind it, was then still called Brown Moses. And he came up with explanations of the gas attacks that supposedly had been committed by the Assad regime against rebels. And later it was found that these were provocations and were staged events. And it's actually the same. I won't go into the detail, but I wrote about it a little bit in my book. But Bellingcat came online 2 days before MH17 was shot down, and then turned itself into a mouthpiece of the Interior Ministry people, especially Anton Gerashenko, the spokesman, who came up with the story that eventually became the official narrative, and that is that there was Russian aggression. The Russians brought in this bug unit and fired a missile, etc. The dossier of Reban is at the website newcoldwar.org in Canada, and also it should come at the Malaysian website, although since the removal of Mahathir, or the downfall of Mahathir as prime minister, the situation in Malaysia has become more complicated than it was when I myself participated in a conference in Kuala Lumpur in August last year. And that's my last sentence, because on that occasion, at that conference, the lawyers who were there were legal scholars from Canada, from Malaysia, and from other countries. They were unanimous in demanding that we prevent the happening of this trial. And the reason for that, of course, we failed because the trial has begun, but the reason for that was given was that the narrative that I started with, so the story of Milosevic as the new Hitler, of the Rwandan Hutu massacres and so on, and in this case, the story of Russian aggression and conscientious or a conscious downing of a passenger plane, that in a trial, a story like that gets the official historical stamp. So it will remain in the collective memory as what it was the prosecution's case. So in Yugoslavia, Hutus, Libya's guilt in Lockerbie downing, and now Russia will be etched in the collective memory as something that is also closed on that basis. So people will later say, well, you don't have to go into that matter again, because it has been decided. It has been before a judge. And that is why the people at that conference, we had a last meeting, I remember, on the Sunday after the proceedings of the conference had finished, and there people said, came to this conclusion. And I still think it's very important, and it gives you a sense of what this trial really is about. It's not about justice, because then these four people would never be there. Well, if they are wise, they will never be there, because the fate of Milosevic and Baranguiza, and also the Libyan guy who was completely convicted and then sent home because of his medical condition. All these people, they had not done what they had been charged with, and it would be the same with the Russians. At this conference, I should also mention that the Dutch diplomatic representative in Kuala Lumpur absolutely misbehaved and went out of the book to try and prevent the conference from happening. They even put pressure on the Mahathir's private office. They put pressure on the organizers of the conference, because they said that the conference had invited conspiracy thinkers, because you know the modern term for somebody who has a different opinion about anything is a conspiracy thinker. And they also ensured that the two Malaysian family members who were planned to speak at that conference at the last minute withdrew. And the details of that I've written about elsewhere, but they make clear that this was something entirely on the basis of foreign intervention. Now, summing up, a trial by media means that we are being treated to a piece of theater, which we should reject. We are seeing that the people who are representing Russia, because that's basically what is happening, have already been convicted by a sort of a court of public opinion. And in the end, it will probably end with the conviction of the four in absentia, so they will be able to continue to live where they do. And the mass public will think, well, that was it, another crime of those criminals at the other end that we should arm against and be vigilant against. And that was the point I tried to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor van der Pijl, for this most interesting essay, I should say, maybe. 3 more guests to go. The person sitting next to me, our German guest, Billy Six. Any comments on the words of Professor Kees van der Pijl?
First of all, I'm happy to see you again.
Well, the feeling is mutual.
I am happy that there's still people not forgetting the MH17 case, even though we have very abnormal conditions now, we should mention. Last time we were talking in front of 300 people in Amsterdam, and now we are communicating through anonymous cameras. Very weird to me, but still thanks to the organizers as well that they didn't forget the trial, which is going to be continued on Monday.
Great to have you here, Billy. Billy did some great research in Ukraine. He visited the crash site. He talked to all kinds of witnesses. He talked to specialists in Germany, aviation experts, I think, but maybe you'd better tell it yourself. I'm sure you better tell it yourself. So please go on.
Yeah, and on 17th July 2014, I was in Kiev, Ukraine, and I saw the events live, the fear of the people, sadness of the people. Many went to the Dutch embassy in Kiev. And the days which followed, I went as a journalist into the UA Crisis Center, which was in Hotel Ukraina, with all the international journalists. And those were the days when the narrative was created. And I did believe the Bellingcat and GIT story that time, because there was nothing else. We didn't have any other information. And it was presented in a very, very convincing way. We saw these images, and there was Nalivaishenko from the SBU, there was the foreign minister Klimkin, there were many generals, and they were all deeply sad, and they showed us lots of photos, and yeah, what could we do? All the journalists there, international journalists, believed it because we didn't have any other information. For me, everything changed when I went to the crash site, when I saw the area, when I talked with the witnesses, and when I read on alternative media that there are other views, and we should never forget again and again to mention Max and his great job. Yeah, and so I started thinking and doing interviews with German militaries, former German militaries, and writing and making video documentaries, and it's not easy to talk against the mainstream because you feel the pressure quite a lot. And I made a little presentation on media propaganda, but I'm not so sure if the audience can see it behind me. Somebody is able to
some technician
check it.
Was able to tell us.
Shall I remove myself so that the screen is free?
Yes, maybe we'd better.
Yeah.
Well, let's ask him, the cameraman, if...
Shall I sit on the side? Yeah.
So.
Oh, now I'm alone here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see it really good, or? Yeah. I want to focus a little bit on the German perception. Unfortunately, when the trial took place last time in March, wow, it's 3 months ago already. Unbelievable, 3 months, and nothing happened in that time. Yeah, the German media and audience didn't really care anymore. For most of Germans, the topic is already gone, and you said something very important. History is going to be made, is stamped. Well, for the Germans, it's already, because we saw many times what I described just now from the UA Crisis Center. Actually, it's always the same story, the same facts or objects, pictures, whatever. For hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. It's what Napoleon said more than 200 years ago already. Wow. And at the moment, same as the Donbas people since 2014, all of us facing and feeling what media warfare means. I'm talking about the corona issue. Because many people say, oh, how can we meet each other? How can we come together? Journalist Jana Yelasheva can't come here today because there are no flights from Moscow. Or at least no one you could pay and be guaranteed to reach your destination. People are afraid all over the world. And it is because of images. Because when I'm asking, why are you afraid? The people say, oh, didn't you see the images from Italy? Oh, yes, I saw the images. That is the right expression, the images from Italy. It's very interesting.
So what do we see there?
Yeah, we see a hospital in Bergamo, and we see lots of sick people being intubated, lots of doctors running around. And the interesting point is, it was made by Sky News, British journalists. They received a special permission. Oh, somebody's calling us. It's for me or for you?
It's the Kremlin.
The Kremlin.
Yeah.
Did I say anything wrong? Or? Yeah. So the British journalists of Sky News received a special permission to enter the hospital at a time when it was forbidden for Italian journalists. And it was the Italian government, especially the foreign minister, who said in public, everybody must watch this documentary. Well, it never happened to me that any government said, you have to see Billy's documentary. So very, very interesting. But it is how the narrative here was made. And the first thing interesting for me, but I don't know, it looks very dark here. Ooh, I hope you can see it. So the journalist who makes it is Stuart Ramsay of Sky News. And that was really strange to me, he was the only one wearing this astronaut dress in the hospital and running around all the time. I don't know if you can properly see it here. And I was wondering, because he's talking about the totally full hospitals and so on and so forth. And of course, if those images are real, and I don't have different evidence at the moment to say it is staged, but one thing has to be said. I didn't see the same inside of German hospitals. They are as empty as never before. And I have friends in Italy who tried to enter the hospitals, and they found hospitals totally closed and other hospitals empty as well. So, but it doesn't mean maybe in this hospital it was a case, but here they say it's like the general situation for all northern Italy. And yeah, it's what I doubt. To come back to this journalist Stuart Ramsay, that's why I mentioned the name, he's well known to be accused by the Romanian government to have staged another documentary in 2016. It was about international weaponry smugglers, because he said in a Sky News documentary, well, the Romanians or Romanian gangs are the ones who are bringing weapons to terrorists, to rebels, to fire the Syrian civil war. Of course, it's not the British and not the Americans, it was the Romanians, a gang. So the Romanian police found those people shown in the documentary and arrested them, and they discovered that all the rifles they had shown in the documentary were legal. Normal hunting rifles, nothing for warfare. And the people arrested said to the police that the Sky News team paid them 2,000 euros to make up a story. So Sky News says, no, not true. But until now, it's not clarified what is the case here. Just an example to say, always be careful when you see any kind of images and pictures, and make up your mind yourself. In Germany, many people of free media do know Dr. Udo Ulfkotte, probably in Holland as well.
Yes, his book was translated into Dutch.
Ah, okay. I just know there's an English version, but it's interesting to know we have a Dutch one as well. He was mainstream journalist for many, many years for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Let's translate it freely as Frankfurt Times. It's the most important German daily. And he always talked about an interesting story he faced in the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s. He says a group of journalists in the bus went somewhere into the desert, nothing happening, and they were old tanks, and then they came with their fuel in a gasoline box and prepared everything, put on fire, and then made up a story like, we are on the front line, very dangerous, this is happening here, that is happening here. So another example, how images can be falsified and can lie. And in his book he describes how narratives are made up. He says that he himself was part of a big corruption system. He was meeting with politicians, Secret Service officials, company representatives, and they discussed political issues. And of course, he as a journalist felt like, oh, I'm important, and he had benefits, and he didn't want to disagree with his friends. So the opinion of his so-called friends by time became his opinion. And just another example, he describes, for example, how he got trips to Oman for free by the Sultan. And, well, pretty nice country if you have money, and if you were invited by the Sultan, even more. So he never had interest to check anything connected with human rights situation in Oman, because, yeah, well, there was a threat, maybe he could lose his benefits. When I was a schoolboy, the first time I heard about the issue that not everything in media is so nice as it seems was when I read the book The Story Hunter by Jürgen Bertram, who was mainstream journalist as well for many years, Spiegel, DPA, ARD, and he wrote a novel, so it's fictional. But I do remember one story of it, which is really inside of my mind. There is this journalist who tries, or who wants his career, and it's very difficult to climb up. So what he's doing, he's flying to Cambodia, and he's searching a child, and he gives money to him, and some sweets, and he says, please walk into the grassland. Yeah, a little more. And the camera targets him just until the moment when the landmine explodes. Boom. And then his TV channel is the one who presents itself to be the charity, whatever, to spend the operation, artificial legs. So they are the heroes to help that poor child. Well, Bertram doesn't say this happened in reality, but it gives you an example of how far journalists are able to go when it is about to make career and to earn money. Very important case in Germany. I think everybody knows his name now, is Klaas Relotius. He was the star journalist of Spiegel, and Spiegel is, I would say, the most important political magazine in Germany. And in 2018, Spiegel had to announce that this journalist has created lots of fake stories. And just to give an example, he went into US, into a small village, and he wants to show that people who like Trump are very bad and very primitive, so all his characters are like that. And he writes about this sign in the entrance, Mexicans keep out. And all this was invented. Same another story, he writes about refugees who are dreaming about Angela Merkel. So if you check the internet, you will find it's now officially declared dozens of such stories. And Spiegel says they have like something like quality management. They are checking all articles if it's true or not. And nobody checked that something was wrong here with that guy. And he got so many prizes because he was writing what the mainstream wanted to hear. And it's always like the same things. Trump is bad, Putin is bad, refugees welcome, climate change is dangerous, whatsoever. So we can imagine what kind of stories were his type of, and there's no problem to write about it as long as it is a reality. But here, it wasn't. So Spiegel became very famous, coming back to our main subject here, with the title in 2014, Stop Putin jetzt, Stop Putin now, using the images of the victims in the plane, the 298 victims. And, well, Spiegel knew that year already what we don't even know today, claiming it was Putin. But there isn't any evidence not in the article, and I haven't seen until now anywhere. And the same narrative, I would say, everywhere in the Western world. Here we have another example from the Sun, from Britain, Putin's missile. And that is, and I come back to you, Kees, what keeps on going in the mind of the people. That's what they remember. Those images and headlines. It was Putin, it was Russia.
Sorry to interrupt you. It was this particular cover, Stopped Putin Yet. It was created by a layout man from Bild Zeitung.
From what?
Bild Zeitung.
Bild Zeitung.
Bild Zeitung, yeah.
Mm. Well, I don't know if...
So these are two very different...
newspapers.
Newspapers.
Yeah, with the same...
Der Spiegel quality, Bild Zeitung.
Garbage.
Garbage. But
Yeah.
then they asked this person from Bild to make this cover image.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Thanks for adding this information here. It's very interesting because Bild and Spiegel used to be enemies like 50 years ago.
Mm.
The both sides of the spectrum. And now all is the same. Seems like it.
Same with us.
Yeah. And those people who are asking questions about evidence are, what are we?
Conspiracy theory.
Yes, because we ask questions about evidence. The judge in court should do the same, right? So maybe he is...
You would hope so.
If he does, he is a conspiracy theorist as well, because... Well, what I heard from when I was in the court in March, because I talked with journalists and with the representatives of the court, yeah, actually they don't really want finally to prove that this story is true, because we know already, we read in media, we just want to prove that the book was brought from Russia into Ukraine. And everything else we know already. I mean, it's common sense, right? It's like the Earth is circulating around the sun. So I won't expect too much anymore from that trial, to be honest, and I'm very sad to say so. Oh, we have Higgins in here. By the way, he is a very nice guy if you talk with him personally. Yeah, so I don't know how he can write the things on MH17 like that, but I would invite you to meet him and learn to know him more. Not just because he's a very important figure in the MH17 case to make the international narrative, but also because it's good sometimes to know that you're not just talking with an anonymous figure on the internet. There's a real people. But by the way, this was an Atlantic Council. I'm happy to talk here and to speak here, but I would talk in front of Atlantic Council as well about this subject. But Higgins was allowed, I was not. Don't know why.
He's associated to the Atlantic Council, isn't he?
Yeah. And he has the right narrative, or let's say the narrative Atlantic Council likes to promote. I want to talk about the Elliot Higgins of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Markus Benzmann. Of Correctiv. So Correctiv is a very important institution at the moment in Germany because they are the ones doing the censorship on Facebook. They are deciding what is a fake news and what is real news and what has to be deleted or shadow banned. They were founded in 2014 with the money of a billionaire who passed away. And now they receive lots of money from NGOs and big companies, including the Soros Foundation. And the first big project they had to do in 2014 was to clarify the MH17 case, to find the truth. And they did it with Spiegel and with Algemeen Dagblad of Holland. Maybe you can say some words about this paper?
Algemeen Dagblad, yes, it was produced in cooperation with Algemeen Dagblad. That's all I know.
No, just some words about who is Algemeen Dagblad.
It's a national newspaper, originally from Rotterdam, I think. But then, yeah, it's a big newspaper. The circulation, I should about 500,000, maybe.
Yeah, it's the largest in the Netherlands, I think.
The largest, even.
I
thought
think
it was a
larger
Telegraaf.
than the Telegraaf. Yeah, it's the same sort of very general, very bland newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So we are not talking about anybody here. We are just or about
it's very big.
very
It's a big newspaper.
So we have important players here, and of course Bellingcat as well participated indirectly, and they made this story. You can still find it in the internet. It's a long article. You can be some hours there watching all the videos and the audios, and there are sub-articles as well. It's a big research, but again, presenting the same narrative which was made on 17th July 2014 already. And wow, I don't see the video in here. What can we do? I wanted to...
You want to play the video?
Yeah, I wanted to play a video, but I can't see it now in the presentation. And the same thing happened last time as well. Can we... Who is the owner of this computer? Who can help me with the... Because I have it here on the USB.
Oh, I think we should... Can you
Just continue.
Just
Yeah,
continue
we
on
continue because it's being live streamed.
It's
Okay.
live stream, so yes. Just continue.
I wanted to show you the how Corrective received the prize, Grimme Prize for this research. Many people, big audience, and they're presented as heroes, and everybody claps their hand and they say, "Wow, this is investigative journalism." Look, they go into Ukraine and they really research and they ask everyone and they showed the truth to us, and that's why they received the Grimme Prize. And later on they received more prizes as well. So, but if you look deeper into this research, you find many strange things. Actually, you find that they lied about many things. And the first point already, and Max van der Werf, we mentioned him today, in 2015 already said, how is possible that the launch site Corrective found of this so-called book missile, where all the witnesses are, as they claim, is nearly 10 kilometers away from the launch site Elliot Higgins Bellingcat says. So something is wrong here. And well, now the JIT decided, no, Bellingcat is right and Corrective is wrong, but they didn't remove this research, still the same, and they still have the prize. And Max found the person which is called in the Corrective research to be the main witness who saw the vehicle and the launch of the missile and blah, blah, blah. And he said, no, I never talked with a German journalist and I didn't see any book. And I was there some months before Max, and yeah, that's a picture you can see. I wanted to show you the interview with my witnesses from the same village. We talk about Pushkinsky, who say, I show the picture of this journalist, Bensman, and some said, yes, I saw him, and he asked about book, when we told him, no, there was no book. There was only the vapor trail of the, not vapor trail, the smoke trail of from the crash site, far away. And this is what he's switched into a trail of book. People talk about smoke at the horizon, and he say, oh yes, that's a book. Can you see this one? I can't see.
Yeah, it's black.
I don't know what was here.
By the way, how is Corrective financed? Can you tell something about that?
Yeah, Anneliese Brost was a billionaire in media entrepreneur, and she died, and some millions were left. And then Bodo Hombach, who was the chief director of the Chancellor's office before, organized that the money is used to make a great charity project. And the idea was, at the beginning, quite good to say, well, people don't trust media, so we should create an institution to control the media and to check the media. But the result is, mainstream media is always right, and everyone else is always wrong. This is how corrective is working. Yeah. And later on, they received money from companies and especially the NGO of George Soros. So I don't know why we see black in here. One part of this corrective documentary is their expert Harry Hollings from Holland, from Leiderdorp, I think. And they say, yes, he is the evidence for us that a jet was not involved because Harry Hollings says impossible. So I went to him, and the first thing he told me, no, I never talked with corrective, and I have never seen these people. So we checked the story, and actually he says, and it's so sad I don't have the video now, but you can find it in the internet. He says, actually all these points where he's mentioned by corrective are fake quotes. It's false, totally wrong. For example, they say Hollings would have claimed that a jet is impossible because the border with Russia is 40 kilometers away and a jet can't turn in 40 kilometers. So he says, no, a jet can turn within 2 or 4 kilometers. What's the problem? He talks about the radars. The corrective says that the story is that in the time of war, you observe the radars, and you see a strange object flying, you shoot directly with a book. Boom, without asking who is it. He says, no, you know what you're shooting to, and more important, there was no war going on in the air. So this kind of procedure, which normally takes place in times of war, that you only have friendly objects, which you know, and you have enemies. This system didn't exist in Donbass in that time because there was no war going on in the air. Also, he is not a fighter jet pilot as corrective claimed. So, but the old quotes of him are still in the research. They don't, and I wrote them several times, and I wrote we have some boards to control media in Germany, and I wrote them and said, look, they had to give the Grimme Prize, and those are the facts. Here's the guys talking on video. So, no, nothing happened. It's just ignored. And, yeah, that's the video also not working, I guess. Yeah, not working. So, and another claim of the corrective research is they said, like, this guy, Ivan Krasnoproshin, he's responsible for downing MH17 because they found in internet he was posting in VK Kontakte photos of him in a book. And he was in the Russian army. So he said, someone like this must be responsible. And the evidence is, the so-called evidence, they found a logbook and said, oh, 2014 in June, he's signing out, he's leaving the army, and that's the evidence that he went to Ukraine. But if you look yourself carefully, you see that he left the army in 2013 already, not in 2014. So and even if it was 2014, what evidence is it for? How can that prove that he went into Ukraine with his book to shoot MH17? And just another point, why he is not accused in court now if corrective has all the overwhelming evidence against him. So there are lots of reasons actually to delete this documentary research totally and to cancel the Grimme Award for corrective, but it doesn't happen. What happens is that mainstream media backs corrective, supports it, because I went with Graham Phillips 2016 into their office and we tried a conversation with this Mr. Bensman, and then the issue escalated a bit. Actually, they kicked us out of the office. And I thought, okay, that was it. But 2 days later, a huge campaign in the media started. The Bild-Zeitung was the first. Pro-Russian attack in Berlin, in editor's desk. NTV said we were masked when we entered the office. The Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung said we rioted inside of the office. And in the Deutsche Welle, it was said or described as a terrorist act. Lots of politicians declared on Twitter, yeah, we are very solidaric against Putin because what Putin did in Berlin was very bad. It was just us two deciding spontaneously we should go there and try to find him.
Maybe you should explain Graham Phillips. You mentioned Graham Phillips.
Yeah, I think everybody knows him, but I mean, he is disputed. He's a blogger, a freelance journalist who was long time in Ukraine and especially in Donbass. And yeah, he's very pro-Donbass, and that's why he's disputed. And yeah, and he came to make an interview with me, actually. That was his reason to come to Berlin. And I told him about my problems with Correctiv because they didn't answer my questions, the issues I mentioned before. And he said, okay, so let's visit them and we can do something out of it. But I was not expecting this huge wave of attack happening, yeah. Well, that time, it was still possible to go into YouTube and to express yourself, because all these newspapers didn't talk with us, the ones I showed just now. They just asked Correctiv for their opinion, and that was the truth. And Mr. Phillips and me, we didn't exist at all. Just in the articles, of course, as terrorists, but not as to having a chance to describe the issue. But it was possible to write our own story on Facebook, on YouTube, but I really fear that's going to change now because we see lots of censorship in Facebook and YouTube, and this year videos of mine for the first time were censored by YouTube, all those things mentioning Corona. And I think you described the role of social media. I would go a little further and talk about Orwellian situation, because if courts can take material from social media, but at the same time somebody, and we don't even know who, decides what will be deleted and what is remaining, so that means the gate is open to manipulation, and we have no chance anymore. And that's why it's so important to me that we use the chances we still have, and we keep in contact and in touch. And yeah, I ask everyone to support the free media. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks very much. Billy Six, very interesting again. We have two guests to go on this transmission. I've been informed Jana Yerlasova of Balanza Media will be with us. He will be presenting some video, some new revelations coming up now from Jana. She will be there's a Skype call. Can I stay sitting here? Or?
Should we sit somewhere else?
Okay. Jana, are you with us?
Yeah, I think so. I see a ceiling, I see a wall, I don't see any people, but yeah, I think I'm with you. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can.
Ja, dan moet je een beetje.
I can hear you. I can hear you. I can't see you, but. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, we can't have you here. I understand.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I understand.
It feels a bit weird, you know, to be talking in this format, but.
Maar ik wil liever daar zitten.
I understand you because of the corona situation. There was no plane going from Moscow to Amsterdam.
Yeah, the borders are still closed. Yeah,
the borders are still closed.
There is some way, but very complicated, very expensive, and there is no guarantee that I would have gotten there in time. So, yes. Yeah, I decided not to risk it.
Well, is there anything you would like to say about what you just the presentation about Kees van der Pijl or Billy Six?
Actually, about your presentation too, but yes, I wanted to give one comment about Kees. He was talking, he mentioned this MIVD document. the one everybody's talking about still. And I just wanted to say that prosecution already addressed this issue.
Yes.
And what they said is these book positions, they did not concern the books that could have come, shoot and leave the place. But I also discussed this with Hector Reben, and maybe a professor discussed with him too, that position 7 and 8 in this document makes it possible for those book installations to come, shoot, and leave too. So when we were talking with Hector, he said, well, it's like a mirror scenario. And, you know, I'm just wondering if GIT was considering this kind of scenario. That's a question. I'm not expecting you to answer this question. I'm just saying, you know, it's just food for thought. And about what you said, Eric, I think it's a very important thought that media should be on trial. Media has become very irresponsible about what it says, what it publishes, and it influences a lot of people. It influences lives of a lot of people. So yeah, I really like what you said that about it. So it's not that only, you know, the people that I don't think it should be possible that if you're a media, you can say whatever you want, you can blame whoever you want, you can basically charge a person with a crime, and then the charges are, you know, relieved, but media stays, you know, unpunished. So I do think that media should be on trial too.
And how's this?
And in case with MH17 also, because there are a lot of untruthful, fake information, a lot of lies, and I think especially in serious matters like that, we should be very careful when we state something and say something, claim something, you know, that something's for sure. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say. I don't want to leave you waiting. Basically why I'm speaking today, because we are presenting Bonanza Media a video report, a new video report. It does also concern media and how it covered MH17, but it also part of our investigation. I hope it will be interesting for you to watch, and then we can discuss later if you have any questions about this report. Okay?
Thank you very much, Jana. Looking forward to your report.
Звук авиации. Я развернулся и назад. Наоборот, пришел, стал. Слышал военные, два военных и один тяжело работающий. Тяжело работал, видно, от этого гражданский, и два военных. Первый хлопок. Самолет ушел туда, на юг. Второй хлопок, на север самолет.
Вы не видели слышали?
Облака. Ну, за облаками.
Какие-то еще другие звуки вы слышали, там, не знаю, шипение ракеты, еще
Не, этого я не слышал. Я сразу тому германцу сказал, корреспонденту.
А немецкий корреспондент?
А он говорит, нет, какой бук? Откуда бук? Два самолета, это я слышал. Не видел, слышал.
А что немецкий журналист вам сказал, когда вы ему сказали, что военные самолеты были?
Не может быть такой, что он сказал. Ничего хорошего.
Не поверил вам?
BBC Russia correspondent Olga Ivshina admits she was on the book hunt since day 2 after Ukrainian Secret Service presented this plume picture as the evidence rebels did it. Olga's detailed testimony can be found in one of the leaked GIT files.
We had to fulfill our initial mission to find the book launch site, speak to locals, whether they have seen the book carrier, the book itself, and also trying to locate that photo released by SBU.
But the reality on the ground was not as definite as the official Kiev statement. Olga failed to find any book witnesses or launch sites and got really confused about origin of the plume from the SBU picture.
What it proved for us was, this is a complicated story. We should be careful and don't make any statements. We were right. This is definitely the proof that a missile was launched. And then we came and just found out that there may be different reasons for that smoke to come.
Olga was also honest about meeting fighter jet witnesses every step of her way. That led to BBC taking her report down the same day it was published. However, 2 days later it was put up again, edited.
There's some rumor that your report didn't meet BBC standards. I don't know what that means.
They introduced a spokesman of the Ukrainian military who said that there was no military operations, no fighter jets in the area on the day of the crash. And it strongly contradicted the things I heard on the ground from many people, some off camera, some on camera.
У нас они кружляют постоянно, с утра по двое, с вечером, и потом включаем мы новости, и наше украинское телевидение передает: вылетов, боевых самолетов не было.
That was the only honest attempt to find the truth any Western media journalist has ever made on MH17. The rest was basically anti-rebels, anti-Russia propaganda, and copy-pasting of Bellingcat's highly likely OSINT claims. Some of them, by the way, have been already disproved by MH17 prosecution. Unlike Bellingcat, we've been doing a lot of research on the ground, and we seem to have the same issue Olga did. While every time looking for book witnesses, we stumble upon people who tell us they saw fighter jets instead.
Что вам непосредственно отсюда было видно?
Видно было истребитель, как он уходил на западную сторону. Самого пассажирского я не видел, высота была большая, гул слышен был, потом хлопки. И истребитель на западную сторону пошел, в ту сторону.
Гражданский самолет, там был огонь или дым, или...
Вспышки, взрыва я не видел, я звук слышал, хлопки, бух, бух, бух. И потом обломки, и истребитель пошел в сторону Дебальцева. Все. Второго самолета я не видел, как потом говорили, что был второй, я не знаю. Я видел один самолет.
А вы один сидели или кто-то еще был?
С женой я сидел. Мы как раз были здесь в беседке, тоже, да, видел. Мы потом еще удивились, почему по новостям сказали, что сбили ракеты, а за самолеты вообще ничего не говорили.
Another witness that was interviewed by GIT says he was quite surprised to see his village on the SBU plume picture.
Если что-то взлетало с земли, такое, да, мы по-любому бы услышали. Сначала все было тихо, потом начали летать над головой военные самолеты. Видел один, точно видел. Второй, как бы слышно было звук, но непонятно, где он был. Раз, так, все затихло. Минуты две прошло, над головой хлопок мощный. Поднял голову в небо посмотреть, увидел след, от чего, не знаю, он был как бы горизонтально. Видно было его, то есть он не так, что вот он как-то поднимается, а именно просто так по небу, горизонтально. Вот, и увидел уже из-за облаков, как бы падал самолет. Падал, как листья с дерева. Что там произошло, я не знаю. Вылетали, летали. Я это слышал. Один самолет я видел несколько раз. Он ниже облаков спустится, пролетит, хлоп, и обратно в облака поднимется. И они как бы, походу, кружили или что-то. Раз, Звук появился, хоп, летит, хоп, звук ушел. Потом опять, хоп, опять летит.
That sounded very familiar. Another witness in our MH17 Call for Justice documentary describes exactly the same fighter jet movements that match the location too.
Спрячется, это уйдет, и звук уходит в ту сторону вторым. Потом возвращается опять. Он кружил, несколько кругов сделал. И вот он выпустил и сразу туда улетел.
Alexander's testimony stayed the same as 5 years ago when we interviewed him for the first time. Here's a few interesting details.
Когда ту Боинг сбили, здесь это кружило, видите, как самолет кружил. А потом в том направлении выстрел получился, дым черный видно, когда он стрелял, я все наблюдал, как по Снежному стрелял, как по Сабуровке стрелял. Пламя и черный дым такой. То вот когда на Снежном он стрелял, летает, и вот так резко вниз, и выстрел вниз, и на Сабуровке. А здесь он стрелял вот так, вверх. И полетел в ту сторону.
Та сторона у нас это что?
Грабово, да. Грабово, Рассыпное, Андреевка.
Could it be the same fighter jet another local saw later, flying around Grabovo area? We didn't connect the dots back in 2015, but now it seems to really add up.
Выхожу, раз самолет, оттуда летит боевой, чуть-чуть выше этого леса, 50 метров. Мне хорошо, видать. И потихоньку летит, не спеша летит. А потом я глядь, вот этот пассажирский, оттуда, и он теперь раз вот так, и навстречу пассажирскому. Бух, сразу вспышка, как сигарета, голубой. Этот дым, а потом черный. Ну это все секунды. Бух, бух, вы там где-то стреляли его. А вот тут уже его добывало.
We discovered another witness during our latest trip to Donbass, and his testimony seems to support Andrei's words.
Что там было на 10 тысячах, я же этого не видел. Кто стрелял, откуда? Здесь, да, здесь кто-то его добил.
Попала ракета, маленькая такая, взорвалась. И квадратная что-то полетела.
Ракет стартовал и видел след.
След, да.
И через сколько секунд?
Секунды 3 она летела, она быстро.
И потом?
И все, взрыв.
3 секунды и бум.
Я след этот видел, саму ракету, она же быстро летит. Вот справа, я же говорю, вот где вот эти столбы, это район, я не знаю, Грабово.
The direction Gennady points to matches the fighter jet's low position Andrei was talking about. But for Gennady, it looked like the missile was coming from the ground.
That you see the plume starting from the ground.
Вы видели, что прям от земли след пошел?
Ну вот видите, вот этот сарай, из-за него ж не видно, его плохо видно. Ну, насколько я могу судить, пошел с земли, не издалека, а вот именно вот за этим сараем, скажем так, вот я увидел этот след уже потом.
Как самолет стал разваливаться, самолет?
Я когда другой раз ударил, тогда уже он разлетелся.
А военный самолет куда делся?
А военный сразу резко вверх.
Самолет я видел. Уже когда мы туда добежали, когда упало, я так в облака смотрю, гул такой далекий гул. И высоко, истребитель, маленький такой между облаками летает.
Turns out Gennady was interviewed once before by a Dutch journalist Aaron Akkermans, the one that miraculously discovered a Buk missile element months after the crash. We don't know what Mr. Akkermans' aim was this time, but with hidden face and 10-second soundbite, Gennady safely became a potential Buk missile witness.
Увидел дым кольцами такой, как от ракеты. Снизу шла ракета, ударила вниз самолета, отлетела.
Вы знали, что это была ракета?
Я предполагаю, что что там еще может лететь. Не камень же там полетит.
Anyways, witnesses come last in the line of evidence, the Dutch journalist says. So why was JT so desperate to find book witnesses then? Or is it only fighter jet witnesses that cannot be trusted, because Kiev said there were no fighter jets? And in Kiev we trust, not to mention SBU anonymous book witnesses. While Ukraine's involvement in MH17 crash is still out of the picture for both mass media and prosecution, analysis by the Hague Center for Strategic Studies suggests the tragedy could have been and should have been avoided by closing the airspace in the first place.
We come to the conclusion that there was a significant and quickly growing evidence base that the situation over the Dnipropetrovsk flight information region was increasingly unsafe to civilian airlines. With respect to Western intelligence services, specifically those within NATO, we have a hard time believing that they were unaware of the increased danger to civil aviation that emanated from the conflict in eastern Ukraine, especially given the fact that all of this was occurring in a contested area that was and remains clearly also an area of interest to NATO itself.
Well, we cannot but agree with BBC's Olga Ivshina. This is a complicated story. So it's only fair that Ukraine's role in MH17 tragedy must be closely investigated.
You with us?
Yeah, I'm here with you.
Jana, this was a nice piece of Russian propaganda. You're being paid I think you're being paid by Putin, and you paid these witnesses to tell us they saw these airplanes. I'm sure.
All of them.
Yeah, all of them. It's one big conspiracy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry?
No, it was very interesting.
The connection is not good.
No, you can't hear us, or you can't see us, or can you hear us? Still with us?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
You can hear me? Oh. Very interested. I'm sure we all enjoyed the item you made with all these fighter jets witnesses. Yes, according to the radar data from Ukraine and Russia, there were no fighter jets visible on radar. So how can this be, all these people? But there must have been dozens of them, maybe even more than 100 who witnessed fighter jets, who heard fighter jets or even saw them. So how is this possible?
Well, if you ask me, I'm not responsible, of course, for Russian radar data, but I wouldn't say that Russian radar data never showed any fighter jets. There were different radar data presented. I don't want to dwell on it so much. I just want to point out that Russian radar data also didn't show any books. At least a book in the presumed launch location. But I remember that Dutch had the MH17 policeman Paulsen. He said absence of evidence is no evidence of absence. So it was not convincing for him that if there is no book or book missile on a radar, then there is no book. So he said still there is a book. So I would then answer you the same. No fighter jets on the radars does not mean that there were no fighter jets. No. Because, I mean, both Max and me, we've been to the crash site not once, not even twice. And we go from door to door, house to house, road to road. And we just, ask random people. And as you can see from our report, these people tell only what they see. If they didn't see a second fighter jet, they say, no, sorry. If they didn't see a fighter jet or heard a fighter jet, then they said that they just heard a fighter jet. So these people are being very honest about what they saw.
Yes. Thank you very much. Maybe Professor Kees van der Pijl or Benny Sek. Can you still hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
You can hear me? Maybe one of my people accompanying me here at the table have any questions about the item? Maybe Kees van der Pijl or Billy Six?
First of all, thanks a lot, Jana, for all the efforts and to present again and again new witnesses. I can just confirm it was the same situation to me I met different people, but I had the same impression and similar stories as we hear just now. And I didn't see anybody who saw or heard the launch of a book.
Yeah. Well, it's the same.
Although, Billy, as I remember, you were first convinced that it was a book.
Sure, because of the images I saw in the UA Crisis Center in Kiev. Why should I expect Ukrainian officials to lie? I mean, they are officials. First of all, they're reliable to me and trustable, and I didn't have any other information. I received different information because I went to the spot. And so it shows how important it is to go and to see the reality and not check evidence on the computer solely.
Professor Kees van der Pijl?
Well, I only want to. I'm not in the class of Jana and Max and Billy in the sense of going anywhere. I worked on the context of the whole affair, and what makes what became clear to me was that you know, the famous saying by philosopher Bertrand Russell was that it is possible that there's a teapot circling around Jupiter, but it's not likely. And it's the same with the bug launched by Russians. It is possible, but it's not very likely if you look at the context and what was at stake at that moment in world history and so on. So I think that...
Anything is possible, I agree with you, Kees, but you know, and you were talking about this too, that basically there's lack of forensic evidence from what we see now in the investigation. I mean, that GIT provided. I don't know, maybe we'll see something more. But now we just recently leaked a document showing that they're not using soil samples, so there is nothing, you know, of importance there to prove the book launch from the presumed book launch site. Then they, if I'm not mistaken, they said that they don't need American satellite images anymore to prove it also. So what do they really have and what do they need? Only those still, for me, for example, questionable pictures from social media and video. By the way, we're working on one of them, but with this lockdown situation, you know, our investigation slowed down a bit.
Yeah.
It is really surprising what evidence there is. I mean, anything is possible. I will agree with you.
Yeah.
But where is the evidence?
Yeah.
I mean, who is convinced? We're convinced through media and Bellingcat mostly, and well, yeah, of course, GIT presentation, but then again, and we already showed with Max that this presentation actually contradicts, they contradict themselves in this presentation, because there's how many butterfly-shaped elements were found, like three or something, and then they don't say the exact missile type, they just say the series.
Yeah.
So it's all, you know, it's all very unconvincing, if you ask me. What I know for sure, it is a very blurry part with this book, you know, driving around, launching, shooting, be it Russian or rebels or Ukrainian, as I just mentioned before. We saw the report that there is also such a possibility that the Ukrainian books from position 7 and 8 in that document would have, you know, come and done something like that. So, yeah, but sorry. So my thought is, but what I know for sure, and that I'm sure about, is about presence of fighter jets in the air that day, in the close proximity to this accident.
Yeah, and don't forget that your witnesses in the documentary that we just saw are all they are there. You can recognize them. They have a name and so on. The witnesses on the other side are 12 anonymous people whom we will never see and whose names we will never know.
Exactly, and These people, you know, I wouldn't say that these people, they're not afraid to speak. Oh, they are. Sometimes we have to spend time talking to people and saying that, you know, it is important. The evidence, what you saw, it is important. So, and in the end, you know, their fear, the wish for justice, you know, overcomes their fear. And they go and they say what they saw online, because this is our rule. We don't. We've interviewed much more people, but we include in our reports only people who agree to speak openly.
Jana, Billy Six has a question for you.
How many of those witnesses were contacted by the GIT?
The ones that we interviewed, you mean?
The ones we saw just now in the documentary.
If you consider Olga Ivshina, the BBC correspondent, a witness, I mean, you were interviewed by GIT too,
yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, but the witness, I know this witness was contacted because he saw a missile from the ground. Yeah. But I mean the ones who saw fighter jets. Yes, the locals who saw fighter jets.
In this report, this
yes.
The Boris guy, he was approached by GIT. He was interviewed by GIT.
It's on the Bonanza website.
This one, and we have a separate report about another witness.
Yes.
Yeah, it's online already. Yeah.
I understand, Jana. There's a question from someone in the public here.
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, I'm sorry, I can't see anybody.
No,
So
maybe
I don't know who I'll be answering to, but
maybe you can say your name and who you are representing.
Yes. Well, I'm just from Weltsmets, and I'm only asked to question some questions from the internet.
Okay.
So I'm only the mediator of the questions. First of all, I heard there was another speaker who couldn't be here. That is Mr. Cees Hamelink. He's ill. And the first question is, there are so many videos of people who witnessed the Ukrainian fighter jets. Has any one of them been heard? And I understand the question as heard by the court.
Sorry, I didn't get it once again.
This gentleman is asking.
Is it a question for me?
No, for the team, for the panel.
This question has already been answered,
right.
Isn't it? This gentleman is asking, Jana, if any of the persons in your documentary is heard by the judge in the MH17 court trial.
Right.
By the judge? No, I don't think they...
No fighter jet witnesses. Nobody is heard yet.
The second question from the internet, people who are listening, is the road of the MH17 was different. This has been explained as by bad weather. What does the panel have to say about this? Has the panel anything to say about this or not?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Well, the road of the MH17 was changed, right?
The course of MH17 was changed by air traffic control.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was 10 kilometers to the north.
Right.
6.5.
Yes.
Yeah. And this, I mean, it is said that the reason for that was bad weather. Is there any other explanation? What do you have to say about that?
I understand this was the officially said by the DSB.
Well, from the black boxes.
No,
because we had a transcript of the communication with the pilots, and it said in the transcript that the pilots asked for changing the route.
Yes.
And it was, they received the permission. This is what I remember.
Yes. So this information is correct.
Well, according to this data.
According to the data of the black box.
The black box is in Farnborough, in the under British Army control. So we have to trust them.
Right.
Yes, okay.
The third question is in Dutch. Zijn er familieleden van de slachtoffers die kritiek uiten op wat JIT stelt? Translating. Are there family members of the victims who criticize the position of the JIT?
I think not in the mainstream media. As far as I know.
But the question is, are there family members who are critical on the mainstream media?
Well, we have one in the studio at this moment, I think. Maybe he's willing to say a few words about it.
Who's that?
No, I don't think he's willing to. Or is he? Yes, he is willing to say something about it. Or not?
Ik vraag net of ik ook wel wil vragen. Ik hoorde dus net dat het vliegtuig...
In English, please.
Oh, I just heard that the airplane itself asked permission to change route in the air. And I understand also that most of the radar installations were off. So in order to know where you're going... and if somebody says you have permission to change route, somebody has to see it's okay to change, to the divert direction. So which radar installations are actually seeing where they're flying to tell them, okay, you can go there because there's nobody else flying there.
Ukrainian ATC.
So there was a radar station still working.
Well, the Ukrainians say that the military radars were off that day, but the civilian ones, I think, were on.
And the radar data of those civilian stations?
It's been proven they were all on high alert. There were 3 Ukrainian military radar stations, and they were all on high alert. This is something that has been proven by, I mentioned this citizen journalist, Stefan Beck. He interviewed the military air traffic controller of Ukraine. And this is what he said.
Yeah, but it's contrary to the official version.
Yes, it's contrary to the official narrative. Yes, indeed. But this was not reported, never reported in any mass media.
Okay, thanks.
Just to come back to the other question, I knew 2 relatives personally. I don't want to mention their names now, but they were very critical. I have an interview with one of them on my YouTube channel if someone is really interested. And both of them changed their opinion after the GIT came up in 2016 with their results. And why? I don't know. But one of them was even in the area of the crash site in 2014 and said he was totally convinced that it was a fighter jet. And today he's not anymore, but doesn't describe why.
In fact, Jana, you interviewed one of the next of kin for your documentary, you and Max. Maybe you can summarize his thoughts on what happened to him.
I interviewed a few. I interviewed an Australian. It was in my first documentary. That was not for Bonanza Media. In this documentary, in our latest documentary, we don't have any next of kin, but we interviewed a few in Malaysia.
Yes.
Yeah. And we also interviewed for my another MH17 documentary, a German next of kin, a woman. Also, yeah, so I spoke to quite a few next of kin.
But the question was if they are critical towards the official narrative.
To official Dutch narrative?
Yes, the Bellingcat GIT NATO narrative,
Well, I'd say they all want to know the truth, basically. They still have a lot of questions. For most of the parts, that's it. If we are talking about Malaysian next of kin, as I understand, they're being very much influenced by Dutch embassy. They say that Dutch GIT members, not Malaysian GIT members, but Dutch GIT members come personally to Malaysia to tell them the latest news, the developments on the case, or used to come. I don't know if it's true anymore. But knowing the Malaysian mentality, they're very, they don't judge, and they don't judge it, they don't blame anyone. But they really want to know the truth. And from what I understood, they're not satisfied with what they know at the moment. They want to know more.
Okay, thank you, Jana.
Just to add one point here, also we have Professor Elmar Gimula from Berlin, a lawyer, who represents three next of kin from Germany, and they're suing or trying to sue Ukraine for not having closed the airspace. But he told me in March that since 2016, nothing actually happened. We're still waiting for the trial.
Okay, another question from the gentleman representing Café Weltsmatch. You collected some incoming questions from people watching us, I understand. So please proceed.
They found also a nice round hole in the fuselage. What do you think about that? So the round hole.
A round hole in the fuselage.
Yeah.
Yes. What do I think of it? I have no thoughts about it. Maybe Jana, or maybe Billy, or maybe Kees.
Well, actually, they're not.
What's the question?
Yes.
What's the question?
About a round hole.
There are all kinds of holes in the.
Yes, they found. Maybe this gentleman means the kind of holes that were found in the wreckage. Those were round, and they were not bow-tied like one would expect from a Russian book. Maybe this is what he's referring to, or.
Well, I think
no additional information?
He or she is referring to the fact that there are holes from a rifle or from a
he thinks
and not from
board cannon,
from an explosion.
Board cannon, maybe he thinks.
Yeah.
So that maybe he thinks MH17 was downed by a fighter jet using his board cannon. Right. Yes. Well, I don't think so, but maybe someone else here wants to say something about that.
Well, there is.
I don't think so either.
Diana doesn't think so either.
Do we know if anyone? Next question. Do we know if any one of the $30 million reward by Vivka has been paid out, and who was behind that bounty?
Yes, there was this German detective, Josef Erisch. Yes. Maybe you can say something about it.
Whenever I tried to ask him, the answers were very strange, that I didn't actually got any evidence.
Sorry to interrupt. Maybe first explain a German detective, because I think not everyone following us, watching us, knows about this German detective. So please explain first.
He's a private detective from Germany, and he says he has a lot of money by an anonymous donator for evidence of who did shoot 17. And then one day he said, the key witness came to deliver evidence, and the money was delivered as well. That means he says he knows what did happen. Both sides know what happened, but he's very careful to actually clearly come up to the public with the story. That's my impression.
Yeah. And you contacted him?
Yes, several times, but he's not precisely answering the questions and avoiding meetings with me. But I know but the interviews which were made as a journalist, didn't answer the questions as well. It always keeps on going a little bit blurry and mysterious.
Yeah, but he wrote memoirs about his career as a private detective, and I should say that the chapter on MH17 is very intriguing. I mean, this is intriguing stuff that he tells about some of the people who came to claim the bounty on the basis of certain information, and the information that he then gives is, in my view, very intriguing, because it leads to things that other people have said as well. But I agree with Billy that when I have also been in contact with him, and for me as a Dutchman, it's a very difficult Swabian accent that he speaks. So we were in touch. He on his website Wifka, there's a list of the items on which he has documents, and he has offered these documents to the JIT on one condition, that the media are present when he hands them over, and he claims that is because of his personal safety. Now, I don't see why the JIT wouldn't accept these materials. And in fact, the JIT has said the presence of the media could disrupt the investigation. Now, I find that a very strange reason for not accepting a package of it's under 10 chapters, and some of the chapter headings are all in his on his website, and I must say some of them are very interesting. Like, for instance, taped conversations between Ukrainian military about Putin flying over. Now, there are many things that can be connected to, I mean, Putin didn't fly over, but there are many things that can be connected to that suspicion.
But
so
the flight schedule was changed, wasn't it?
No, that's true.
Of this flight of Putin.
Yeah, but it's a detail. But if I were on the GIT, I would say, well, let's have a look at it.
Interesting question, interesting answers.
Okay. Next question. Do we have any additional transcripts of communication not in the DSB reports?
Transcripts of
what?
Any audio or additional transcripts of communication which are not in the DSB reports.
Communication of the cockpit
black
with
box or what? The cockpit conversations?
Audio tapes. Oh, audio
tapes from the cockpit crew.
Right.
Cockpit crew or these audios from the SBU between...
So do we have any audio or additional transcripts of communication not in the DSB reports?
The only communication from the cockpit is the one we just mentioned, and concerning audios of evidence audios, so-called, for the JIT, we only have those of the SBU. Joost Niemeller asked that 2016 and said only SBU wiretaps.
Okay,
the SBU report is on the internet, so if the gentleman or lady wants to read into it, it's available there. So
I have a question for myself. Is any of you, Kees, or any of the other ones, asked by the judge, the Dutch judge, to give a...
If we are invited into the MH17 trial, no?
Right.
Well, I was...
What do you think about that?
Oh, but Billy has been interviewed by the JIT.
Yes. I was invited by the JIT in 2015. So, and I was...
But not in the judge. I mean, there is a defense. I understand as one of the guys is defended by a lawyer. So the lawyer could ask you, or one of you, to give an explanation of what is happening.
If the lawyer of this Dubinsky, his name, Pulatov. I'm sorry, Pulatov. Okay, so this gentleman or lady is asking if one of us is invited by the lawyer of Pulatov, to hear any of us. No.
But that the trial hasn't reached that stage yet.
Exactly.
Well, maybe we should add that when it started in March, if I remember correctly, the defense said we haven't read the prosecution files yet. 37,000 pages, is it correct?
30,000 pages, correct, yes.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine it? You're sitting in court, and that's the first moment you listen what they are accused for and which evidence do exist, and then you hear that it's 30,000, or I think it's even 37,000 pages. That's why we waited 3 months now, not for Corona, but for this issue. And I don't understand how it is possible to organize a trial like that.
And the interview they did with you, Billy, is surely added to these 30,000 pages?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was in the Bonanza Revelations.
Yes.
Okay, I got another question from the internet. What are the speakers hypothesis of what happens. So what do you think really what happens?
Mm-hmm. I'm blank. I don't know. I'm sorry. No.
Yes.
My book is about the context, and I don't know. In the end, I don't know who shot down the plane. But as I said, it's very implausible that the Russians had an interest in doing that. But that's all I can say. Otherwise, all the detail is very incriminating for the Western position.
All I can say about it, it's very, very complex. The more you dive into the subject, the more complex things become.
Yeah, that's
so
almost like reality.
So well, maybe Billy?
I keep on going with the report of German General Hermann Hagener, that it was or it is more likely to have been downed by a jet than by a missile from the ground.
Yeah.
But as journalist, I have to keep on going with the facts, and there are not enough facts yet to give a final conclusion.
No, and we can't read into the 30,000 pages, we journalists. Maybe Jana has something to say about this?
No, I'm as a journalist, I'm not going to speculate and make any claims. We are continuing with our investigation. We're still on the same position that GIT investigation is far from satisfactory. You've seen the report. You know that one thing is for sure, there were fighter jets, Ukrainian fighter jets in the air that day. In a close proximity to MH17 and the tragedy that happened. And well, me personally, I think that Ukraine's role should be considered in the investigation, and not only not closing the airspace, which is the prime reason for this accident happening, prosecution was clear about that. They're not going to investigate that. It's not part of the investigation. But then I really think that it's impossible to ignore the presence of Ukrainian fighter jets in the air. They should be considered, and their role should be closely investigated. Mm-hmm. So that's my position.
Thank you very much, Jana. I think we're closing now. We are ending up now. Any final words, Billy? Kees, maybe?
Kees first.
No, I can only say that we will hope that there will be a proper trial, but I think all signs are that it won't be. And we will have to accept that we must continue to investigate even after a verdict would be handed out.
Yeah, I hope the organizers and participants to this event, and also those who listen to us, hello, will keep on going with the subject and not forgetting MH17, whatever happens the next months or years.
Okay, thanks everybody for watching. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.